This is Humans of Non-League, a podcast about the people who live and love football outside the spotlight. My name is Chris Nee, and this week's human is a genuine legend of the non-league game in and around London. Joe Vines has been celebrated by supporters and teammates alike throughout his playing career, much of which was played wearing a captain's armband. He made his name as a tough tackling defender at a number of clubs, including Bromley, Crawley Town, Lewes, Tooting Mitcham United, AFC Wimbledon, Maidstone United, and of course at Cray Wanderers, where he's also been applying his coaching skills as assistant manager. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris. That was a lovely... I don't know if you missed any clubs off there. I know it's a long old list.
Definitely a few. Paper Mills?
Cray Valley Paper Mills, yeah. Ashford United. I think there's Margate. There's a few in there. All obviously very sad to see me leave at various times. Yeah.
Yeah, trying to do it in one breath as well, though, so I had to truncate the list a little bit for you.
Yeah, you got to be careful before you fall over. No, I appreciate it.
I'm going to take you all the way back to the beginning, and I mean all the way back as well. We've never spoken about this before. We've had a few conversations over the years. Where did you grow up? Where's the beginning of the Joe Vines story?
So I'm from, and you'll be upset by this, I was born in King's College Hospital, which is just up the road from Dulwich Hamlet Football Club. So I'm a Camberwell boy originally. I lived there until I was 10. So I used to go to school in Brixton, and we lived in church housing, and it's like a housing association. And obviously I've got a brother and two younger sisters and my mum and dad's, and we all jammed into a little pokey flat in Camberwell at the time. So they decided there was like a house swap arrangement. And from there we moved to Sidcup. We had a townhouse in Sidcup, which is where I've spent most of my later years until I was a proper grown up, and I moved out on my own. But yeah, started in Camberwell, Brixton as a kid.
So was that kicking a ball around the streets your first intro into football?
Yeah, do you know what? I didn't really play football properly as a kid because, well, firstly there weren't much grass. The school playground was concrete. There's a thing, I mean, South London boys will recognise, but there was a big five-a-side tournament thing, the Brixton Fives, and it was set up by like a police. It was to do with the Metropolitan Police, as a way of like getting the kids off the streets, and that was something that good footballers at my school. I went to St John's Angel Town, which is a pretty rough area in South London. Anyone that knows Brixton will know Angel Town, and everybody aspired to get in that five-a-side team, but obviously there's only 5 kids, so it was quite difficult to break into it, and I never managed it as a primary school kid. So when I moved to Sidcup, I was 10. It was in the final term of year 5, I think. That's when I really started playing football properly. So I used to kick about with my brother in the street, and we used to do other things and like throw stones and cause mischief on the estate. But we weren't really, we didn't play for a proper club or anything along those lines.
Were you consuming professional football early on, following a team?
Yeah, I'm mad Spurs. My dad's mad Spurs. My brother's mad Spurs. My dad's from Hackney, was born in Hackney originally and then moved to Brixton. But he used to go and watch Spurs in the 70s, and he loved it. He's a Spurs mad. So we still go now, and it's probably the only place that I see him truly happy, because he's a miserable sod.
Who were the players who caught your eye at like 10, 11 years old?
Oh, I mean, I know the moment I fell in love with football, really fell in love with it. And it was the 1990 World Cup, and it was Paul Gascoigne. I didn't want to be a footballer. I wanted to be Gazza. Obviously we've got slightly different playing styles, but he was the ultimate because he had that charisma, and he obviously loved the game, and he left it all out on the pitch. He was the one. He was absolutely the one. Gazza all day long.
Did you then follow that all the way through Gazzetta Football Italia?
Yeah, that's why I was a big fan of Italian football, because I followed Gazza to Italy, obviously with a big move to Lazio, 5.5 mil, and I fell in love with people like Baresi at the title slightly earlier, but Maldini, Beppe Signori, Lazio had some really good players at that time, but also people like Gabriel Batistuta, and even in the more recent years, people like Inzaghi, just they had the technicalities of the Italian game was so much better than the blood and guts of, and I do love the blood and guts of the English leagues, but I think the quality, you'd watch a 0-0 draw and it'd just be a chess match. Two excellent sides, just well drilled and coached, and it was a thing of beauty for me. I really bought into that, and I liked it much more than even the Spanish league in modern years. I think that those early '90 Serie A teams were just perfection.
What was your introduction into playing organised football at whatever age that was?
Just at school, so at sort of 10, when I moved to Sidcup, I got introduced to the school team, started playing, and then my brother and I were having a kick about over the field where we lived. And some guy came over and said to my brother, like, how old are you? And he said, like, 8. And he's like, well, do you want to play for a team? So my brother started playing for this team, Cray Lions. So they were like quite a well-known team in the Sidcup area. Cray is like the armpit of Sidcup. It's not quite the arse, it's the armpit. And there's a couple of estates around there, and it's quite a rough and tumble area. And then I got introduced to the older team and I started playing. And my brother actually played a year up all the way through. And we just got stuck into it. And it eventually, my manager left and my dad took over. So my dad was my manager from about 13 till 17 till I stepped into adult football. But those were my formative years, really, just playing with my mates and having a laugh and enjoying all that football brings.
Before we move into adult football, was there anything else as a kid that kind of had your attention away from the game?
I played everything. I played rugby. Okay. I represented the school athletics. I played cricket for the school. I played, you name it, I played it. I just love sport. I just love, more than anything, I just love competing because, people that have got younger brothers or older brothers will know that like you're ultra competitive. You're born competitive because you always want to beat them. You always want to win. And my brother and I were close and still are. So we were always trying to, whatever it was, there's a winner or a loser. Someone's going to get the ump. There's going to be a fight at the end of it. We were just that way inclined. I think my mum was a sprinter. She used to run 100 and 200 meters. My dad used to play football, but he was asked to play rugby. Someone came up to him in Tesco's, asked him to play if he wanted to play American football because he's a giant of a man. But he's the same. He never used to let us win. When we was kids, he's very competitive, so it was bred in us.
Were you academic?
Yeah, reasonably. The school that I went to, the secondary school that I went to, wasn't a particularly good school, so I was in top sets for everything. I achieved good grades in my GCSEs, but at 17, I decided I wanted to go to work. I liked the idea of earning money, and I got an apprenticeship with the Royal Mail as an electromechanical engineer. But I failed all my exams with that. So although I didn't have an education, any further than that, A levels, I was doing a HNC in electrical mechanical engineering. So, if I'd have passed that, I would have had effectively a degree from De Montfort University, which I thought was just something you heard on an advert on TV. But it is a real place in Milton Keynes. And then at that point, when I failed my exams, I stepped out of that and, pursued other options. But yeah, academic and to a degree, I was smart enough.
Where would you say your football career began in terms of being signed to a club where there was a pathway to the first team?
Well, I went straight into the first team at Cray Valley Paper Mills, but at that time they were significantly lower than where they are these days. They've had a real good run. They've got a very good structure and a very good manager. But at the time, they were in the South London Alliance League, which sort of covered all the way around to Leighton and Bow and all around East London. And what happened was I used to play on a Sunday morning above my age group. And all those boys were going into under 18s and then adult football. And one of the players, his dad was the chairman at Cray Valley. So they said, like, why don't you come down and have a go on a Saturday, try out on a Saturday? So very quickly, I broke into the first team. The manager at the time is a guy called Chris Brady, who's the dean. I think he's the dean of Bournemouth University, but he's a really smart man, and he really took me under his wing. He was one of the first A licensed coaches, alongside people like Paul Bracewell. I don't know if you recall Paul Bracewell, who played for
I do.
Newcastle. And Chris was, how or why he was involved at that level of football, I will have no idea. But he was unbelievable, an unbelievable coach and an unbelievable man. He actually advises on business in football and football in business. So, for example, when Cristiano Ronaldo got his move to Real Madrid, he was talking about the effect that would have on the infrastructure of football as a whole. The money that Man United would get, they would then spend X amount on players from these clubs, and the knock-on effect of that. And buying that player would mean a 25% fee for this club because that's where that player originally came from. That whole waterfall effect. So Chris is like a super smart man. Somebody that I loved my time with, and he was the one that really sort of. And at that time, I was living in Milton Keynes doing my apprenticeship, so I didn't used to train. I used to come back on a Friday, and I just used to play on a Saturday. That was it. I never trained with him or anything, but he just gave me information that. And it also, at 17, the other thing that really impacted my football was the fact that I got contact lenses, because up until that point I couldn't see. So I was just charging about, like kicking lumps out of people and running into things. And surprisingly enough, at 17, I had a lot of interest from professional clubs because of the fact that my game just came on rapidly.
So you had that good influence early on. Were you already established as a defender at that point? Was there any positional change in your youth football up to that point?
Yeah, I was a centre half from day dot, really, because I could attack the ball. I was aggressive. I wasn't great at checking my shoulders in midfield. I had a little go in midfield, but I wasn't really, the awareness. I was better with the game in front of me. I was a real front foot defender. But actually, as the years have gone on, I've played all over the pitch. I was quiet. I could play left back. I could play right back. I played in midfield. I played in goal at one stage in Conference South. Goalie got sent off a winning goal. I've literally played in every position, I think, over the years. But my natural, I think, at my best, I was definitely a centre half.
Yeah, I've seen most of those positions myself.
Yeah,
over the years,
yeah.
One or two of them certainly. If I put you on the spot and say you've got a few seconds to give me a whistle-stop tour of the Joe Vines experience through London and South East non-league football, how much of that can you kind of recall as a career path?
I can give you it cradle to grave. I can tell you everything. I literally, because I look back on it all with such, people always say, "Oh, do you think you could have done better?" And I did exactly what I was supposed to do in the game. It wasn't anybody else's fault. It wasn't my fault. I was working from 17, so I didn't want to be a footballer. I wanted to play football. So I haven't got a bitterness. I've got a lot of friends who are like, "Oh, I was at Millwall and I got let go," and there's this sob story around it. Whereas I loved every second. I wouldn't take any of it back. I wouldn't make any different decisions. It was an absolute joy. Even the bad things that happened, the injuries, and I've learnt from, or there's been some good that's come out of it. Again, I don't know if that's just my skewed view on the world, or I'm a eternally positive person. But when you look at, I went from Cray Valley to Cray Wanderers, stepped up a level. I went from Cray Wanderers to Bromley, stepped up a level. I went from Bromley to Crawley, stepped up a level. Then I stepped back a level, went to Lewes, had a really successful period there. Then I went to AFC Wimbledon on loan, went back to Lewes, fought my way back into the side, then decided to leave, even though I got offered another year's contract in the Conference South. Went to Bromley again, had a successful period at Bromley. Then went to Welling briefly, had a nightmare, had an injury. Then went to, I can pick them off. I can tell you exactly where I've been, who I was with, what happened, and then went to Tooting, had unbelievable time at Tooting. But every club I've been to, I've had some sort of affinity with the club. And I think you have to enjoy it, whether that's the manager. I mean, ultimately you play for the manager, but if there's a club that have got Margate was a fantastic club with great fans, really supportive, great fans. And there are other clubs that I would never go anywhere near because I knew that I wouldn't get on with their supporters. People like Tunbridge Angels, like And my mates are down there at the minute. My mate's the manager. He's probably gonna, if he listens to this, he's probably the knives will be out. But they turn on their own. I never understood that, and it didn't sit well with me. So I love to play for teams that really bought into you, and I love the fact that as a player, you can play the game and someone's going, "Oh, that's no good," and then you go in the bar after and you can have a drink with them, and they go, "Oh, I think you," and you go, "Oh, I think this," and that's the beauty of non-league. I think your Premier League footballers are so far removed, whereas we're in the bar with you. We're one and the same.
I saw a guy called Paul Vines score a hat-trick against Tonbridge Angels once.
Yeah, good player him. Good player.
Yeah.
Still going apparently.
Yeah.
Just about.
That was a surprise. Still scoring goals.
Yeah, just about.
Anybody who lives kind of well to the north of me would hear that list of clubs and think that you were a local player. There's a lot of travel involved between where you lived and where those teams are. That's a huge span of football. So you lived the full kind of non-league experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I speak to, obviously there's boys that I've been friends with for years that people won't realise. There's boys that have played their whole career in Essex but live this side. There's a boy called Frankie Chappell who's, I think he's at Whitehawk now, but he played for Folkestone and those sides, but he's from Woolwich. You wouldn't know that. You think he lived on the coast. So people do travel and people go where they're wanted. I was working throughout that whole period. For a lot of that time I was working in Bromley in the early years, and then I was working in the city. So I was traveling to I was working in the city, get on a train to go and meet someone, to jump in the car to go all the way down to Lewes or Margate or Ashford even. And then, Tuesday night, game finishes, back home, get in at 12 o'clock, up at 6 o'clock back into the city. So there's a lot of hard work and dedication to it, but it's the game. It's the love of the game, isn't it? Because certainly wasn't the money. The money was okay. You'd get a couple of quid, but it's not life-changing. It's the love of the game.
As I recall, you quite enjoyed a bit of panto villainy.
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, I loved it.
Do you still do it now?
Yeah. Oh, I've upset Kingstonian. I upset the Kingstonian fans the other the beginning of the season. Yeah, there's always there has to be, right? There has to be, because when you've got 300 people in the stadium and someone's really giving you grief, you can pick that person out. If there's 20,000 in the stadium, it's a wall of noise. I think that it's easy to hide as a player. Yeah, you get the U's and the R's and a few boos, but you're hearing an individual digging you out specifically, calling your name. It goes quiet. They're calling your name when you sort of turn around and they're on you. And I think that you've got every right to give them a bit back. And what I found, not with all non-league fans, but they're the ones that have generally got a lot to say for themselves, are mostly not the sharpest. So it doesn't take much to cut them down. So I must admit, I still enjoy that. I had about 800 or 900 Lowestoft off fans on a bit of string one time. That was just beautiful. Alan Mccloud. You'll remember Alan Mccloud
Very well, yeah.
He was the same. He's a great lad, and he could have a fight in a telephone box, and he used to upset people for fun. It's all the fun of the fair. Love it.
It sort of mirrored your game as well, didn't it? Because as a footballer, I think you would best be described as very aware, very cultured defender, but combative as well.
I could play, but I enjoyed the competition. I much preferred the big, 6'2", 6'3" Alan Shearer all action type centre forward than I did the little nippy ones that you couldn't get a tackle on. Yeah, I loved any advantage I could get over and I was talking to a friend of mine recently, Gary Elphick. He's at Hastings now, but he's been through the leagues. We played Eastbourne when they were in the conference when we were at Tooting, and we drew the home game on the Saturday 2-2. They scored a late equaliser. And then we went down there on the Tuesday night, and, they were expecting to roll us over, and we beat them 4-2. And he was saying to me, he said, I remember you and your brother, you picked on the left back. He said, you came up for a corner and you were talking amongst yourselves, but louder. And you were saying, we'll play on the left back because he's toilet. Oh, he's got nothing about him. Like, he's the weak link. Let's play on him. We're just playing him because he's the weak link. What do you think? Yeah, he's the weak link all day long. And even though he was a good player, we made him into the weak link. And so much of the game is in the mind. You know, you talk about confidence players and, you know, oh, you're watching someone on the telly and you go, oh, he's lost all his confidence. Well, you need a single-mindedness and a resilience to play sport, full stop. You see golfers with the yips, or you see, you know, people falling to pieces, you know, tennis players and such. You need that resilience and that mental toughness. And I think that's what I had. You know, I wasn't blessed with ability as such, but, you know, I was a fierce competitor, and just loved every second that I played more than anything.
So, we're going to talk about this because I've got Francis Duku and Gavin Rose on the next couple of weeks. So you and I are going to talk tooting. Our paths first crossed there in 2008 was my first game there. You scored a goal that night, actually. And the team that you captained there over those few years, for me, was very memorable and really kind of lit up my love of non-league football, full stop, which is like why I'm doing this and why I still go home and away with my local team now. You must look back on that with a huge amount of pride.
Yeah, it was brilliant. Yeah, because there's so many facets to that. Because, you know, what people don't understand is Bill and George came across off the back of, you know, some sort of skullduggery at Bromley. You know, Mark Goldberg came in and basically took the job. They'd done a good enough job, and, you know, he came with him with a lot of fanfare and, you know, putting his own money into it and stuff like that. I know he's still involved he's at Welling, I think, but yeah, he's not my cup of tea. And George and Bill are like two of the most unbelievable people. They're old school. They do their deals on a handshake. You know, people say this, they broke the mold, or they don't make them like that anymore. They really don't. And, you know, Bill was widely respected. You know, he really knew a player, but Bill was he understood me because we were very similar. He's quite an angry man. He's just a brilliant guy. He every other word was a swear word. He was scared of money, so George used to do the deals. George used to do the negotiation because Bill hated it because it wasn't his driver. You know, he worked in the flower market, Covent Garden flower market, but he was, you know, his passion was football. And obviously he was a good player in his time, but he was just widely loved and respected in the game. And George is the same. How they came together, they were mates for years and years, but they obviously, you know, managed separate teams. But them as a pairing was unbelievable. So there was that. They brought my brother in and they were sniffing around him. We went away on a trip to Fengarola or somewhere with Bromley, end of season. We knew we were all going, and they were on me. And my brother, I'm sure he came with us, and they were on me going like, get your brother to come over. So he'd come over, and I was going to Welling because I wanted to try and play as high as I could at that point. And they're like, nah, come and play with your brother. Come play with your brother. So I think I lasted 5 or 6 games at Welling. The guy was playing me right back, and then he released me. I didn't leave on my own accord. He released me. So then I ended up at Tooting. So originally, Alan Mccloud was the skipper for the first 2 years. Great player, Al. He was with us at Bromley as well. And what they managed to do, slowly but surely, they brought Romold in from Cole Shorten. They had Dean Hamlin, who's still there now, who's like the evergreen Dean Hamlin, unbelievable. Originally, they bought Aaron Good. They had obviously Dave King in goal. My great mate Dave, best at the bar ever because he's 6'5" and he just stands there buying the drinks all night. He's fantastic. We had Eben Allen. We had Ronnie Green. We had, you know, Ben Abbey. We just had good people, and what they built was a side that was, you know, the camaraderie. We used to go out every Saturday together. It didn't matter who you were. You know, there were no little cliques. It was, you know, such a joint effort, and, you know, all of the boys really enjoyed one another's company. We lived in each other's pockets. Colin Hartburn, you know, what a great guy he is. Matty York. You know, the list goes on really, because individually, you know, I wouldn't have said that we were the best, but as a collective, people always talk about that Tooting team, always. And they'll say to me, oh God, that was an hard team to play against. You know, they never rolled over and had their belly tickled. You know, we were competitive for 95 minutes, hard to beat. And we used to get in people's faces and really, you know, the way that we were set up, you know, we played it at 3-5-2. so we were all out action. So we could wallop you, we could get walloped, but you knew you were in for a game.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. Do you stay in touch with the players and management from that
Yeah,
team?
yeah. We've got. I mean, George Wakelin's like family to me. Obviously, Bill Smith in recent years has really struggled with. You know, he's got a bit of a decline in his health. You know, so it's been difficult. We had a little get together a couple of years ago down the club, but there's a WhatsApp group. There's a Tooting WhatsApp group from that era. You know, people like Simon Parker and
some player he was as well.
Yeah, great player, great foil for my brother.
Yeah.
But they're all the boys. They're exactly the same. You know, Matt York, he's all doom and gloom. He can't help himself. Nah, he's a great lad, York. He's a very underrated player as well, by the way. But yeah, the boys still get on. Dean Hamlin was texting me yesterday about something. So yeah, we sort of built really good friendships. We'll probably see each other when we're old and grey or older and greyer.
You strike me as the kind of person who would pick up some relationships like that from your other clubs as well.
Yeah, I mean, my missus gets the I can't walk through Blue Water without people stopping me, and I think I've collected them over the years because when I went to Cray as a player the last time, when Tony signed me as a player, and one of the guys I played with is a guy called Lewes Tozer, and he said that after 2 or 3 weeks in, he went, "Vines," he went, "You're a top man. You're a top man." I said, "Oh, thanks, Tozer. Like, that's really nice." He said, "I always thought you were a right prick." And I said, "Well, it's because you were playing against me. So if you're against me, you're against me. But when you're on my side," and because I've had so many clubs over the years, as you can imagine, and you know, you go on nights out and boys are mates with other boys and you get that extended, it's that 6 degrees of separation. I've been very fortunate to pick up a lot of mates along the way. And hopefully that will continue. I think it's the best place. You know, football is such a leveler. I often talk about, you know, Dave King was an accountant for law firms. You know, Dave's got like 3 houses, he's got 2 cars, a motorbike, and his best mate in the Tooting dressing room was a young boy off the estate, you know, a young black boy that, you know, in the real world, they would never have been, their paths would never have crossed, let alone been best mates. You know, and I've seen them hanging around each other's shoulders on a holiday and drunk. It's beautiful.
Yeah, he worked hard, King, as well, didn't he? He missed a few games.
He is a fantastic fella. Fantastic.
What would you say was your proudest achievement as a player?
It's hard. There's no one standout because there's just good stories. There's just, you know, there's I've won leagues. I've won via promotion. I won a super playoff before there was a super playoff. You know, the FA Cup run that we had, and we played Stockport, we got beat 5-0, was brilliant. The run was brilliant, but the day was brilliant. We lost 5-0, but the night out was unbelievable. It's one of the best ever. It was greatest achievement. You know, what I loved, what I think, what I felt, or what I enjoyed or was most proud of was the fact that my brother and I played together so much. You know, for Tooting, for Cray, for Bromley, for Maidstone, you know, for Greenwich Borough in the end, like all of these clubs, he sort of, you know, I thought he would kick on. And I think he was unfortunate that he didn't because he was consistently score goals. But, you know, I think for me, playing in the same team as him was brilliant.
What was it like chemistry-wise playing with Paul? Because you're different ends of the pitch, obviously, but the relationship is still there and was very evident from the sidelines.
Yeah, we used to row though. We used to we used to row, and we used to row on the pitch, and you know, because I would expect more from him than I would everybody else. But yeah, the chemistry was good. Like we get on well. Like he's, you know, we're close. We're still close, as close as two brothers could be, really. But you know, he never used to listen to me. He's his own man, you know. But I'd say to him, "Have a touch," and then he'd volley it first time into the top corner. And he'd turn around and say, "I see, you're telling me I have a touch." Like, all right. But yeah, I mean, chemistry-wise, as players, I understood his game more than most. I think that was no more evident than when I played against him, because I don't think he ever scored against me. But, you know, when we played in the same team, I think I was able to get the best out of him.
Bearing in mind your style, I think we've touched on this a little bit, but what does football mean to you? What should it look like?
Well, I'm a walking contradiction because the way that I played it was the way that I was good at. I was discouraged to step into midfield as a centre back, like carry the ball into midfield, because that's what I like to do. I like to carry the ball and try and get into midfield and then create an overload and play. But all the managers said to me, don't do that. Your job is to get it, edit, volley it, leave it a curly one down the line, and then we'll press and we'll play high. And so I was professional in that I used to do what the manager told me to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily enjoy that style of play. When I joined Cray as a player more recently, I fell in love with Tony Russell's style. He's a very progressive, possession-based manager and coach. But there was no sort of arguments with me falling into that way of thinking, because again, I'm a Spurs fan, right? So, we play beautiful, or we have done until we're going to win something this year, by the way, playing ugly. But we play beautiful, attractive football and always fall short. That's the Spurs way. So I sort of had this romanticism around how the game should be played. When you think about the players that I loved were, your David Ginola, your Gazzers, your Chrissy Waddles, the creative players, the flair players. They're the players that I want to pay money to watch. Those ones, the creatives, the avant-garde, those, what do they call the magicians?
Wouldn't be the same without them, would it?
Mm.
I think we should probably move on to what you're up to now, because you are still very much involved with football and with Cray.
Yeah.
And you are assistant manager?
Assistant, yeah, that's right.
So
yeah.
You are now Joe Vines, the coach. How's that journey been for you?
It's been good. So I'm this is my 4th season. The first year, stepping out of playing, because originally I was a player coach or a player assistant. So I still very much, loved the competition. But stepping out of that and getting accustomed to, the player side, the managing the player side, there's very much not a good cop, bad cop, but, I like to whisper in a few ears, and, I like to do a lot of the one-on-one stuff with boys, and, I read a lot. So because of my job involves managing people, I've read a lot about the psychology of business and the psychology of sport and creating successful teams. So, how I manage, I've introduced some factors to the club that I call it the 1%. I've improved certain aspects, not just me, but I've encouraged and helped the club and the management function introduce certain things that I felt would improve us as a team and as a club, and which has been proven to be right. The video analysis piece, there's a well-being piece. So, for example, when the boys walk in the dressing room, they have to give a score that involves their physical and mental well-being, so we can identify anybody that's having difficulty without them actually telling us they're having difficulty, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's been great. It's been brilliant. I think I've developed as a coach. I think I've developed my understanding of the game tactically, which probably wasn't as good as it should have been as a player. Maybe you don't look at it in that way, but I knew my job. I didn't necessarily know all of the moving parts. I think that's really greatly improved over the last 3 years. And obviously we've had a lot of success in the last 3 years. We came third the first year, lost in the playoffs. Then we won the league the following season. And last year, at point of the league stopping with 8 games to go, we were second. So, you've seen year-on-year improvement. This year, where if we win our game in hand, I think we go second again. And we've had a better start than we did last year. I think for me, working with Tony Russell, he's been great for me because we understand each other. I've probably got a lot more leeway and a voice than most assistant managers, because we try to do everything together, whether that's player recruitment or all sorts of aspects of what goes on. During the lockdown, I created a scouting network. I built a database of 2,500 players at our level. So not just me, but as a collective, but drove that forward. So just always trying to just nick that extra advantage where we can. And I think Tony being open to that, he's quite staunch in some of his views, but being able to have somebody that will listen and say, like I say, Tone, I think maybe we should do this. And he'll say no because of this or that. And then I have to work on him and work on him and work on him. And then to the point where he either says, look, leave me alone, or okay, give it a try, but on your head be it. So I think that relationship's really helped me.
That cerebral approach is quite a modern way of taking on that job, isn't it? So have you got boys in the dressing room who knew you as a player who are now looking at you and thinking, where's this come from? Who's this guy?
I think if you played with me, or if you know me, if you were just sitting in the stand and you're watching me play football and kick lumps out of your centre forward, then your perception of me would be very different, to somebody that sat in the dressing room with me. I was a thinker. I was, constantly, I used to research. When I played, I used to know what foot the striker, I wouldn't necessarily watch videos. We didn't have that luxury, but, I would know that someone like, I don't know, Danny Hockton would strike the ball early before you were set. I would know that, so I would get close to him. I knew that he couldn't outpace me, but I knew that if I gave him a bit of space, he was hitting shots that would go through your legs or to the side of you, and before the goalkeeper was set. I was aware of, not necessarily tactically, but I was a student of the game. Even when I was finishing up playing, I had a list of players that I liked, because I always thought that I would step into that side of things, and they were players that I think suited the way that I wanted to play the game. Mitchell Nelson plays for us. You remember Mitch as a 19-year-old kid. He played alongside me, so and we're really close. And he often talks about, I spoke to him a lot as a 19-year-old kid. Some of which he took on board, some of which he didn't. But he played at a much, much higher level. Mm-hmm. He went to Bournemouth, so I like to think that maybe the perception of me from those that don't know me would be very different to those that do.
Is being the first team manager a long-term goal of yours at some point?
Do you know what? If I were to leave Cray, then I would probably look for a management role. I think the difficulty is I've got a business that that we've started quite recently that takes up a lot of my time. And I think that to be a good manager, a successful manager, you need to really dedicate a lot of time to going to games and, watching football matches and watching players. I do a lot of that stuff from home in terms of the video analysis and such, but I don't go to games currently because my situation doesn't allow. I've got a young family as well, so they want to see their dad. So it's a balancing act. I'm eager to test myself at a higher level, whether that's Conference South or Conference National. Half the teams in the Conference National, or more than half, are full time. That would mean that I go and be a assistant manager on 20 grand a year or something. I mean, not to sound too much like Naomi Campbell, but I wouldn't get out of bed for that.
Some of those, the fully professional teams at the lower end of that spectrum are very, very young, aren't they? The players, for a reason.
And you can see, I think there's a drop off in quality because of that reason, because there are the boys that go to work and play who are very, very good and won't step up a level because the impact that it will have on them financially. And then you've obviously got your bigger boys that will pay the money to allow for proper professional footballers. So it's that, it's not a fair playing field from that perspective. And as much as I've got aspirations to go higher, I would need to be an assistant manager, probably at League One or Championship level, for me to earn the money that I earn going to work. Don't make sense, does it?
No, it doesn't. So you've already told us that your day job, your work, has a positive impact on aspects of the way you approach your role at Cray. Does it work the other way as well? Have you taken lessons from football into your professional life?
100%. When you look at managing teams, because people come from all walks of life as well. So, silly things like, I managed a big, it's probably about 30 people, a direct sourcing team. So I'm a technical recruiter. And it was a real mixed bag of male, female, all sorts of ages and ethnicities. And one of the things that we would historically do to celebrate success would be to go down the pub. Now, we had return to work mums within that group, for example. So they get in at 8:30, they leave at 5 on the dot to go and see their kids. So they've done just as good a job as anyone else, but they can't go down the pub. So, you have to have empathy for everybody's situation, and understanding. So that's what football's given me. It's not a one size fits all. This whole, you've got to treat all your kids the same. Well, you don't, and you haven't, because people are different. What drives them, what motivates them. It's the old man management piece. The arm around the shoulder or the kick up the backside. I think that's going away. I think that we're bringing up a generation of children that are told that they're great all the time. They're not living through the same level of hardship on the whole that maybe my generation was, and certainly not the generation before. So, you have to find new ways to motivate and inspire. And I'm continuously looking for that.
And football can help you with that, because, even in your level 1 coaching, one of the key things that you're told is these players, some of you guys are going to be coaching young kids, and you think that you can do it through the universal language of football. But the reality is you don't speak that language at all. And you need to be understanding of all of that and understand their culture and their world in order to coach them properly.
I mean, what you'll find is that you'll have an affinity, or, it will be easier. So, for example, I like the problem kids. I find the problem kids are easier for me to coach because I was a problem kid. I was one of these that was always in trouble and getting up to mischief. And when I find one of those, I find myself immediately drawn to them, and I invest a little bit more time and effort into it. But why should I then disregard, the kid that's turning up diligently and hasn't got any problems? Their dad drops them off and they get on with their business quietly. So you really have to be mindful of where you put your time and your effort to get the best out of each of them, and obviously give them exactly what it is that they need. The younger player, some of the older players, you might think, well, they don't really need me to go and say, well done. They know they played well. Well, of course they do. Even if they're 35-year-old man, you should be saying, you know what, you're leading by example there. I'm really pleased. I'm really proud of your work. Thank you for making my life easier, whatever it might be. But I don't think you can ever take any of them for granted.
I'm dying to hear about the new project. I love my football, Joe, but I'm dying to hear about the new project. Tell me about the Ascenders.
Yeah, so it's a concept that was sort of that was pulled together by myself and a really good another ex-Tooting man, Dean Forbes, who's a really successful businessman. So he's created the Forbes family group, which is predominantly, originally it was around a portfolio, a property portfolio, but he's expanding that into more charitable work, and he's keen to give back. He's another guy that has had a real tough upbringing, single parent family. His mum was disabled to a point, and he's managed to succeed in life, and he wants to give something back. So what we've seen, both of us, Dean obviously being black, I come from a mixed background. My dad being my granddad coming from Guyana originally. So kids like us from where we're from generally have a tough go at it. The kids from the estates, low social economic situations. And when I see the news, whether it's mainstream media, newspapers, and this rhetoric of kids stabbing each other or getting up to no good, etc., we wanted to create a body of work, and it is a body of work, right? There are individual podcast interviews, but it is a body of work, and it is to be seen, hopefully, as a collective, where we can showcase people that are from the areas that we're from and have similar background to us, that have carved out success, and how they've done that. Whether it was they've been into prison and then worked their way upwards upon their release, and turned over a new leaf. Whether that somebody mentored them or supported them financially or otherwise. So just talking about the characteristics and the habits of successful people. So far we've spoken to some really, really interesting people that have opened my eyes up to, even me in my wise old age. to new ways of reaching the top, and they're inspiring stories, and I hope that those people that have had the opportunity to listen to it or will do see it the same way that I do.
Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being my first guest, but for your generosity of time.
My pleasure.
Where can we find you? Where's the Ascenders? Where's the best place to find you?
We're everywhere. We're on Twitter. I believe that the handle is @RealAscenders. The same with Instagram. The Full Family Group YouTube channel is where you can subscribe, so you can get notifications that the next one is coming. But they're being released on a weekly basis on a Thursday, so keep your eyes peeled for those. As I say, some really inspiring people on there, and you might learn something. You never know.
Good stuff. Well, if you've enjoyed meeting Joe, there's plenty more where that came from. Don't forget to subscribe to the show if you haven't already. Please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening.